Welcome to Iconic Conversations, a podcast where we share colorful conversations, inspiring stories, which reflect the beauty of God's kingdom. And so I'm really excited today to launch our Overtime podcast. And today I have joining us, first I have TJ on the other side.
How's it going?
And I have Isabelle also. And guys, I'm excited because today we're just really having a chat, a conversation. All three of us are on the Icon church staff team. And so people kind of know us as people who work in the church, right? But before we worked in the church, we actually had a life outside of church, right? And we all have like our individual...
For yourself,
Dave. My parents were like, you're the last person we thought was going to work in a church. But before we served in the church, we all have kind of our own church stories, our own backgrounds, right? And so I kind of just wanted to have a conversation about what that looked like for us. What is your story with the church? What are some things that you may have loved about your church kind of growing up? And what are some things, if you keep it a buck, what are some things you hated about church growing up? Actually, so Isabelle, can I start with you? What's your church story? And
I grew up going to church. My family went to a Church of Christ church, and so I had no idea what a denomination was until I was 18. I just knew that I went to a very stuffy traditional church, and I thought all churches were like that. So I think as a kid, it's not that traditional churches are hard. I think just as a kid, it was really hard to connect. And then also it was a very small church. And so we are a small church. I don't think our kids in our kids ministry are weird, but I'm telling you guys, the kids in my kids ministry were weird. And so I just did not want to be friends with them. They were just kind of super goofy, nerdy Christian kids. And so I think just all around it was really hard to connect in that church. I did become a believer later in high school, and I joined another church and was going to a youth group, and I had a much better experience with that. This youth group, we just there's so much camaraderie that I loved about being a part of a church, and I think that's where I really learned how to serve in a church and actually be a part of the church. And so we just did everything together. We would go to the church after school and we would study in the chapel, and we ran Sunday services, and we ran their kids ministry. We basically ran the whole church, but it was just, again, there's so much camaraderie around having friends and being able to do that together that I really loved.
How about you, TJ?
Yeah, I also grew up in church. I was really blessed to have parents who really valued that, and we were, I don't know if we were forced to go to church as much as we just it was never a question. I didn't know that there was another option. And I think a lot about when my family and we lived in Baltimore for a few years, and there was one Sunday that there was a snowstorm and they canceled church because people couldn't drive. And my parents were like, then we're just going to have church in our house. And so that was kind of the environment that I grew up in, where it was really we believed in the church and the opportunity to gather with other believers. And so I would say as a kid, I loved it. I went to a church that had lots of ministries and exciting things. And I got to, kind of like Isabelle was saying, I got to serve. And that was really the very first serving job I had in the church was our kids minister. I was in middle school at the time, and our kids minister was like, I need somebody to turn off the lights during the kids video. And so I would just stand in the back, and all the kids, he would have them all go 3, 2, 1, lights, pancake. And then I would turn off the lights. And so, I think I felt in the church, I had a place where I was valuable and where people cared about me. And so that was all really good and really positive. It really honestly that aren't great and aren't healthy, and some of the later experiences that I had where I kind of realized stuff that was going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about as a kid, where I saw some of the more difficult parts of church. But I would say, growing up, I had a great experience at church. Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of piggyback off of what you just said right there. It's when you grow up, you kind of realize, there's a lot of other stuff happening in church. One of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation is because there are a lot of people who have maybe seen some of the things, right, that are ugly or broken or messed up. And maybe they are coming to a point where they're like, hey, I don't really know if the church is for me. and there's some objections and reasons why they feel that way. And so today, actually, like the most of our time today, I wanted to just have that conversation. So some of the most common objections people have about the church and about like themselves being a part of a church. And kicking that off, like actually the first kind of thing is kind of with what you just said right now. It's like the first objection people have is that the church is full of hypocrites, right? It's like they say one thing, but then they do another, right? They judge other people and say, you should do that thing.
Mhm.
But then in the background, you find out in the news that they were doing something, scandalous or whatever, right? So what would you, if someone is kind of like, hey, the church is full of hypocrites, like, any thoughts in terms of what you might say to that? Or just how would you respond to that?
Yeah.
I actually feel like the first church that I grew up in was a church that you would classify as one that's full of hypocrites. But the reality is that it wasn't full of hypocrites, at least in the circumstances. I'm not saying that there's not a church that exists that genuinely is not full of it, but we know that the church is full of sinners and imperfect people. And the thing is that they're just as sinful as you. And so we can be upset that, maybe you did have some hypocritical experiences in a church, but I think that my story is a really good testament that like not all churches are like that. A good chunk of them genuinely aren't. And also there's good people everywhere that we look. I mean, in a way that, we're all sinners, but there are
Mhm.
people that do really love the Lord, and maybe their personal walk with Jesus is looking a little different and different than what you want it to look like. But that's what the church is for too.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus died for.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think similarly, I think that there is, just because we believe in Jesus and have the Holy Spirit does not mean that we are perfect. And so there is, for all of us, there is an element of we are still continuing to grow and mature in our faith. And we often have mixed motivations or sinful things that we might not even realize that are in us. And so there is, I think, some level of grace that we can give to other people and say, like, it is true that there are people who are doing things that do not align with Jesus in the church, and we can see that really clearly. And I think, even like all throughout the world, we can see that. I think there's that famous quote by Gandhi. I don't remember the exact words, but basically like, I love Christ. I just have a problem with Christians. Right. And so there's kind of that idea where it's like, none of us are going to perfectly embody what it means to be like Jesus because we're not Jesus. And so we can see the reality of it. And I think we can acknowledge that. And then we can ask, for us as a church, how can we be better? And how can we better live into the gospel and better model that? And if somebody was like, well, I don't want to go to a church because I'm afraid of being hurt by hypocrites, I would totally empathize with that. And I would say, I think that in the church, you will find both. This is kind of what Isabelle was saying too. So I don't know if this is like super groundbreaking, but I just think you will find people who are far from Jesus and who are not doing what Jesus has called them to do. And you will find people who really are, and you will find love and grace and connection. And so I think maybe just because there is the reality of the bad doesn't outweigh the positive of the good, and that we can have redemptive experiences, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what the gospel is about redemption. And so my hope is for any person who has experienced the hypocrisy of the church, that they would find true, genuine Christians who can redeem that community for them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I resonate with that. There's no perfect church out there.
yeah.
We're all imperfect people, and there's all the churches are also imperfect.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a difference between a healthy church
For
and
sure.
a toxic church.
Yeah.
And one of the things that actually makes a church healthy is whether people collectively, the church leadership is like, hey, like they acknowledge that they are broken and they're sinners in need of grace, just like everybody else, but they're committed to like grow. They're committed to learn, and they humble themselves, right? To walk this kind of journey towards like spiritual maturity and, this kind of like becoming more like Jesus together. And instead of like going like, no, we have it all together. Like we're good. There's no
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
Right. If you do that, then no one actually has a chance to share their struggles, and that create in and of itself also creates a very unhealthy, toxic culture as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that the reality is that all of us in some ways are hypocrites, and only Jesus is perfect. And this is why we all need grace, even in the church, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the church. So that's kind of the first objection people kind of share. The second objection, I think, is interesting. It says the second most common objection is that the church is irrelevant or out of touch with like real people, real problems.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and just the church kind of just feels like it's in a different world. Right. What's your thoughts on that?
I think I think this kind of, to some extent, goes back to the last question, which I do think there are times in which the church has been out of touch with the real world, that there have been, in an effort to maybe try to do the right thing, I think churches have sometimes like said, we're just going to avoid hard topics. Like I think that a lot, particularly with things like sex and sexuality, is like for a long time that was like taboo, not to be talked about. But that's something that people are dealing with, in real life. And so it's like, how do we not talk about this at church, but then that's something that people deal with. And then, or it's kind of like you go to the church and you just kind of get like the Jesus answer, where it's like, oh, I'm sorry that your life is hard, but there's hope in Jesus. And it's kind of like, yes, but like, are you really dealing with the real issues, or, things like mental health or counseling that I think are becoming more like the church is dealing with more now, but for a long time didn't. And so I think there is like a reality where there have been disconnects. But ultimately, I think that it's the church's job to speak to reality and to real life. And I think that Jesus does, and the Bible does. And if we can be faithful to that, then it does matter. And I think the other thing that I would say, I thought about this a lot when I was in youth ministry, that I think for the most part, the biggest disconnect that people have, even who go to church, is why does what we do on Sunday matter the rest of the week? And why does what we talk about at youth group matter when I'm at school? And so I think as a church, we can do a better job of saying, like, how do we actually make this relevant, not in like a cheesy way, but in a real way? Like, why does what we do matter? Because I believe that it does. I think that the gospel changes everything about life. And if we are being faithful to love and follow Jesus, then it will transform everything about our lives. And so, I think that it has been disconnected, but it doesn't have to be. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that it's such a cool and unique opportunity to change that in a church, maybe. Like, I'm just thinking, like, I don't know if you guys have ever been in a community group where maybe people aren't really opening up and you're just going through a really hard time and you're like, I'm just going to be really bold and do the really scary thing and share something super deep. Or if not a community group, just like a friend group or a social circle in which like maybe you guys don't normally talk about really heavy things that are actually going on in real life. But I feel like almost every time I've been in a situation like that, where like I'm in a community group or a Bible study or something, and somebody brings up something like really real, it changes the culture in that group exponentially for the better. That's not to say that every experience that you have with sharing something hard is going to be like beautiful and amazing and people are going to respond perfectly or anything like that, but it is a really cool opportunity. Maybe if that's something that you see lacking, to bring in, and it's going to feel very scary and maybe counter to what everybody in your body is saying to share. But it is also really freeing and cool to do that.
Yeah, I think too, it could be like kind of a good test of a church, honestly, is like if I ask a question or if I share this thing or if I say whatever, how does everybody respond? And you can kind of start with something small. But if it's a church that I think is following Jesus the way that they should, there should be an openness and a willingness. And it should be like a culture changing kind of thing. But if not, then you can be like, maybe there's a different community for me.
And in that too, give their responses grace too, because if you end up telling somebody and they're like, well, we have hope in Jesus, because they are doing their best, but they genuinely don't know what to say, because that might happen. you can use discernment and be like, okay, is the
Mhm.
entire culture of this church genuinely that they don't care or don't talk about hard things? And maybe I don't want to be a part of this particular church. Or is it just like, hey, this is really hard and it's really hard to respond to this. And so I'm going
Yeah.
to give you grace that you didn't have the most like profound answer and I'm crying after this kind of thing. Because that might not always happen.
Yeah. I think the thought for me is like when I think about relevance or out of touch, um, like I'm really probably out of touch with my kids, like their culture, their slang, their the stuff that's in, right? I'm really out of touch with a lot of that, right? And then for me, it's like for me to try to like be like them and like know all the cool stuff or whatever, it's just not gonna work. It's gonna just be awkward and weird and inauthentic to me,
Oh,
right? But the way that I could be relevant with my kids is like me on a person, like a human being level, like loving them, right? And actually caring about what they care about. Like it really like being a safe space for them to be able to share what's going on in their heart. And I think at the end of the day, like the church is supposed to be known, Jesus says in John 13, that we're supposed to be known for love, right? And how we love one another. And I think like love, relevancy for me is like if the church is like committed to love, we're always going to be relevant, right? If the church is committed to love people who are going through real problems, they're like real situations, then there's always going to be a relevance there. Maybe the church is out of touch generationally or whatever with some of the stuff in the culture, but when it comes to people, I think that always is going to matter. And so that's kind of like for me, like what I kind of think about is like, how can we love people in a true, genuine way and get to know each other in true, genuine like, and also like, do we have that willingness to do that also for people outside of the church?
yeah.
Right. That's something that kind of
Yeah,
comes to
I think
mind.
that's an important point too, because the church should not be insular, where
Mhm.
it's like, hey, we just like this is our what do people call it? A holy huddle? This is our holy
Yeah.
huddle. It's like we should be out in the community and we should have relationships with people, and if we do that, then I think we're better equipped to speak to the realities of life.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Last objection that we want to cover for our time together is people sometimes will say, actually, a lot of times will say, well, I don't really need the church, like the institution of the church, to have a relationship with God, right? I can just me and Jesus, I can grow. I don't need other people to do that, right? And if that's the objection, you have any thoughts and kind of what you would might share?
You want me to
I would love for you to go.
go? Well, I think that um, we need other people, is what I would say. Like, so I think there is like a question of like institutionality, and like denomination and all, like building and budget and all that stuff is like less important, right? But the institution in the biblical sense of like the people of God that he has brought together, like that is I just kind of think like not non-essential, that is essential to what it means to be a Christian.
Mhm.
If you look at what Jesus did, if you look at all the things that he commanded us to do, that those require other people. And I think, and I'll just speak like for my experience, like I don't know how I would follow Jesus without other people. Like I wouldn't have known who he was. I wouldn't have learned what it meant to be discipled. I wouldn't have had an opportunity to do ministry. Like just basically like my whole Christian walk is entirely dependent upon the people who have walked alongside me. And most of that happened in my local church. And so I think to say like, well, I just like I can just be me and Jesus, I think is inaccurate. I think that we do need other people. Um, and I think even the idea that like, well, it can just be like me and my friends, kind of like hanging out and talking about Jesus. I do think that there is something deeper when it's like the people of God who are not all like each other and sometimes like don't agree with each other, and you get together and you say, but the thing that holds us together is the gospel. To me, that's really meaningful, and I think that for myself, I would not be the person that I am or the Christian that I am without the church.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think I would take it a step back too and think like, why do you think this? And maybe this, if you're in this camp, maybe this isn't you. But in the past, when I have heard people tell me that they don't need the institution, that it's just them and Jesus, there's so much pride behind that statement and how they got to that conclusion. Um, and so to that, I would just say to decenter yourself. The people that I'm talking about, it's more so like, well, I can't find a church that politically agrees with me perfectly, or I can't find a church that relates to me a certain way, or a pastor that, just doesn't give me goosebumps every time he talks. And so, like, it's just going to be me and Jesus. I don't need the institution or the church, or maybe I don't agree with where every single dollar the church is giving. So it's just going to be me and Jesus. I don't need the church.
Yeah.
And it's just, church is not about you. And praise God for that. That is amazing and super freeing. And I've also had the same experience where community has grown me. It's grown my marriage. It's grown me as a mom, so much better than I could have done alone. And so take the community and take the institution, because there are a lot of redemptive qualities about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I resonate with a lot on that. But I think for me, like also like I was that guy that was like, all church y'all are hypocrites. I don't trust the institution. Like I don't trust the leadership. And so like I remember that. And part of it is like we grow up in a very individualistic culture with a
Hmm.
very individualistic kind of mindset. And so it's like, how can all of this kind of like work for my benefit, or like how is this worth my time? Is this worth the ROI? Like, and so if that's the way you're coming at church, it's just like that's not what the church is, right? Like, I'm just reminded, especially watching like the church across the world, that's not
Yeah.
what other Christians in other countries are asking or
Yeah.
thinking about necessarily. Like the places where the church is thriving and growing is actually in the southern hemisphere,
Mhm.
right? Like, and so like for me, I'm just kind of reminded of that. Like the church includes me, but it's not ultimately about me, right? It's
Hmm.
not about my people or your people. It's about God's people and us living together as God's people. And so it's so countercultural. And so it feels wrong.
Yeah.
Like it feels wrong when we hear like, you know, to decenter ourselves, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, that's true because the pastors and leaders who they don't trust,
Mhm.
the reasons why the church is a mess in their church is because the church, possibly the pastor made the church about them,
Yeah.
and that's why people get hurt by church, right? And so then we don't want to add to the problem, and we don't want to, like, we want to be a part of the solution, right? And so yeah, I think this is a hard thing,
Mhm.
but it's definitely something that's important. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think like particularly with the institutional thing, like you were just saying about there are pastors who have made it about them. There are like many instances of institutional abuse
Mhm.
and like failure to do what God, because it's like we're protecting the church instead of like protecting the people of God. Um, and so I think I would just say like, man, I would love for everybody who wants a better church to join the church and make it better. Like that. I think instead of abandoning the church because it has failed, I would love to build a better church and to focus on what it means to be healthy and to follow Jesus faithfully. And I honestly think that most churches are doing that imperfectly, but I think there are big, really bad examples that get a lot of publicity that I think give a bad taste in my mouth about like what the church can be negatively.
Mhm.
But I think that if we join a local faithful body that we think is as healthy as it can be, and we try to make it better and try to put structures in place to keep it from becoming that dangerous institution, then I just see a lot of really good benefit out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as we kind of wrap it up, what is something that you would say to a person that maybe they've been disconnected for a while, but they're like, you know what, uh, I'm feeling that nudge. I want to go back to church. I want to try again. Is there any advice you would give? Any suggestions or encouragement you may give to someone who's kind of like about to take that step? Maybe
Mm.
feeling a little nervous and
Mhm,
scared,
mhm.
but who's about to take that step?
You start. You're in charge of connections.
Okay. I'm trying to think. Um, that is scary. I don't know. I guess just like validation that is really scary. Whether you haven't been to church in decades, or it's been a long time, or you were hurt before, or maybe you've never been to a church and you're like, I don't know when to sit or stand up or do anything. So yeah, I guess just validation, like it can totally be scary, and I totally understand that. My advice would be, if somebody doesn't talk to you, go talk to somebody. Um, Again, depending on who you are, that might be your worst nightmare, but do it. Whether it's somebody on that church probably will have some kind of connections team, whether they've got team shirts or lanyards, or it's just somebody that looks comfortable at this church, just talk with them. Because I think it kind of takes the idea of the church as an institution and just this like far off thing that we talk about and we don't like, or maybe we like part of it but not the rest of it, and putting faces to the actual body, I think helps a lot, and helps. And what we talked about a lot was like giving people grace, and they're gonna be broken, maybe be a little hypocritical. I hope not. Probably not, but it is a possibility. You might feel that. But they are people, and so I think talking to them, getting to know their names, all of that might be very beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I think I would say first we have coffee, so just come get some coffee. um, I, I think I would say like I know, and this is anecdotal, so take it that however you want to, but I know far more kind, loving, healthy Christians who want you to come through the doors and give you a hug and be Jesus to you and with you than the opposite. And so I would just encourage somebody. It is scary, like Isabelle said, to walk into a new church for the first time. Even for me, as someone who's gone to church my whole life, the few times that I've like transitioned to a new church, it has been scary the first time. And sometimes I've had bad experiences on the first day. But if you give it an effort, I think that you will find people there who love you and who care about you. I just was talking to a guy from our small group who kind of communicated. He was like, I was really nervous to come the first time, but he's there every week, and he loves it, and we love him, and it's been just a great part of our group. So all that to say, I think I would say if you feel like you can gather up the courage, I would encourage you to risk it because I think that the long-term benefit is incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'm just really grateful. Thank you guys for your time and just just for feedback. So our plan as a church, we're going through this church series together as a church. But we're doing the Overtime podcast to just kind of like follow up and have conversations, right? Because we realize that when we're talking about the church, there's a lot of different kinds of questions and ideas and stories. And so this is us kind of like overtime processing it together. And so it would really help us if you in the comment box or if you just, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, like let us know. Like we want to be able to like make this podcast really helpful for you. And we also want to hear from you. And so if you could, post on the comment any kind of questions you may have, any things that you might want us to address, that will be really helpful for us. But anyways, this is our first podcast, Overtime podcast that we're launching today.
Woo.
And so we'll catch you guys later.